So I will begin my lecture by quoting a paragraph from a recent article by Professor Françoise Briquel-Chatonnay, who is internationally renowned in Phoenician studies and has dedicated many years of research to the political, economic, and cultural history of the Phoenicians. I quote, "The Phoenicians have always been an object of great scholarly interest, but often only in a marginal way. On the one hand, they are a fringe topic with biblical studies, and on the other, they keep attracting considerable attention as partners, enemies, or counterparts of the Greek and later the Romans." The study and research on the Phoenicians could not fail to engage all scholars of the ancient world, as their presence and historical trajectory, as Professor Briquel-Chatonnay aptly notes in her preface, were closely intertwined with the great civilization of the Greeks and later the Romans. The first significant advancements in Phoenician and Punic studies started during the 1960s and 1970s, a period that witnessed an unprecedented expansion of archaeological research. This flourishing of scholarship was primarily driven by extensive field work across the Western Mediterranean, particularly in Italy, on the islands of Sicily and Sardinia, as well as by the landmark UNESCO-sponsored excavations at the ancient city of Carthage in Tunisia, which commenced in 1972. Simultaneously, political developments in Spain created fertile ground for additional archaeological endeavors, yielding an extraordinary volume of material evidence. These discoveries catalyzed a series of typological studies, forming the bedrock for systematic and more nuanced investigations. In Italy, this momentum was championed by the distinguished scholar Sabatino Moscati, professor of Semitic philology at La Sapienza University in Rome. Moscati played a pivotal role in institutionalizing Phoenician research by founding the Centro di Studio per la Civiltà Fenicia e Punica under the auspices of the Italian National Research Council in 1969. His efforts integrate archaeological discoveries with the critical examination of Phoenician references found in classical texts and inscriptions, advancing the field significantly. This ensuing decades witnessed a remarkable proliferation of academic output, including conference proceedings, specialized journals, monographs, and essential research tools. This intellectual search culminated in major public exhibitions, notably in Brussels in 1986, and the highly celebrated The Phoenicians exhibition held at Palazzo Grassi in Venice in 1988. These cultural milestones not only captured public imagination, but also strengthened academic research. A new wave of research emerged, broadening the scope to encompass not only material culture and religion, but also political institutions and the mechanism of Phoenician expansion in the Mediterranean, with particular attention to the interactions with the Greek world. However, this period of vibrant activity was not without limitations. Research remained predominantly focused on the Western Mediterranean, and was exacerbated by the outbreak of civil war in Lebanon. The conflict curtailed field work in the Levantine heartland of Phoenician civilization, with rare exceptions such as the excavations at El Ghazel in Syria. Consequently, the Phoenicians were often depicted as marginal players in a Mediterranean-centric narrative, with cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos relegated to the periphery of maps and conceptual frameworks. All these studies operated under a fundamental assumption that the Phoenicians constituted a clearly identifiable and cohesive cultural entity distinct from the neighbors and firmly situated in time and space. Yet, contemporary scholarship has increasingly interrogated this premise. Some scholars have gone so far as to question whether the Phoenicians, as traditionally understood, ever truly existed as a unified people. Let us begin by examining who the Phoenicians were, exploring the image of them that was constructed by the ancient world and constructed it with the reality of their existence. We must consider whether there exists a gap between the image and the reality, and if so, what accounts for this discrepancy? How are the Phoenicians connected to Cyprus? What was the nature of their presence on the island? And what legacy did this presence leave in the ancient history of Cyprus? These are the central questions we will address in this lecture. The impact of modern political history has significantly shaped the study of Phoenician and Cypriot histories. Reconstructing the past is complicated by the political dynamics of the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, which continue to affect archaeological excavations and interpretations in Syro-Palestinian coast and in Cyprus. Both regions were dominated by great colonial powers in modern times, influencing how ancient history is written. Additionally, Cyprus' ongoing division and the ongoing wars and distractions in the region of Syro-Palestine obstruct a comprehensive understanding of its ancient history and archaeology. The political context of these periods are crucial factors in complicating the objective study of these ancient histories. Now returning to antiquity and attempting to address the first question posed, who were the Phoenicians? The first reference to the Phoenicians as inhabitants of the coastal regions of Syro-Palestine appears in the Homeric epics, where the term is used alongside the more specific Sidonians. In the Homeric poems, the term Phoenician is not used as a marker of ethnicity. Instead, it is employed to denote those who originated from the coastal cities of Syro-Palestinian coast when traveling far from their homeland. In the Iliad, we encounter an example of this. During the funeral games for Patroclus, the prize for the victory is a beautiful crafted silver bowl. This bowl, according to the text, was made by Sidonian artisans and brought to Greece by Phoenicians. Here, the artisans are identified by their city, Sidon, while the merchants who transported the bowl and refer to collectively as Phoenicians. Similarly, in the Odyssey, Odysseus recalls paying Phoenician nobles to transport him to Ithaca. These men later returned to their homeland, the beautiful built city of Sidon. These passages suggest that people from Sidon could be described as either Sidonians or Phoenicians, depending on the context. The term Phoenician was used when they traveled by sea or operated far from their homeland, while Sidonian referred specifically to their city of origin. The significant insight provided by the examination of the poems is that while the adjectives Phoenicia, woman of Phoenician origin, and Phoenikes, Phoenician merchants, are used, the adjective specifically denoting the geographical region of Phoenicia is absent. The designation emerged later in Greek historiography to define the coastal territory between Aradus, Arwat, and Mount Carmel, with boundaries corresponding roughly to those of modern Lebanon. The Homeric poems present a complex image of the Phoenicians, celebrating their skills as sailors, merchants, and artisans, while portraying them as opportunistic adventurers capable of piracy and fraud. They are framed as a moral counterpoint to Greek heroism, reflecting Greek perceptions during the 8th and 7th century. The great Greek expansion westward began during a period when the Western Mediterranean already familiar to the Phoenicians, became a region where Greeks increasingly viewed the Phoenicians as rivals. But why the Homeric poems call them Phoenicians? The term Phoenicians, Phoenix, is a Greek invention absent from Phoenician text, reflecting an external and ambiguous designation. It has been associated with the Greek words of red, phenos, possibly referencing the purple dye produced from murex snails, though this link is debated. Another theory connects the name of the hero, Phoenix, credited with discovering purple dye, as recounted in a Tyrian legend involving a shepherd's dog. Coins from Tyre featuring this motif suggest Phoenician roots for the story. Other hypotheses, such as a connection to the Egyptian term fenhu, the woodcutters, referencing their setter trade, remain unconvincing. Ultimately, the term signifies a Greek-imposed collective identity and not a self-designation. What did they call themselves? The Phoenicians called themselves Canaanites and their land Canaan. The etymology of Canaan is debated, similar to the Greek Phoenix. The Hebrew word Canaani, meaning merchant, reflects the Phoenicians' renown as traders. Some scholars link Canaan with the purple dye industry, as the term kinahu in Akkadian refers to the purple dyed fabrics. Ancient sources, including those by Hecataeus of Miletus and Philon of Byblos, associate Canaan with Phoenicia, suggesting a historical connection. The term Canaanites persisted in references to the Phoenicians. A Hellenistic period inscription from the Punic sanctuary of El Hofra in Algeria identifies Canaan with Phoenicia, and coins from Beirut, issued during the reign of Antiochus IV, describe Beirut as being in Canaan, further equating Canaan with Phoenicia. Thus, it is clear that the original name used by the Phoenician was Canaanites. A final point regarding the reference to Canaanites and the Phoenicians. The terms are used differently in modern research. The Canaanites were primarily a phenomenon of the second millennium BC, replaced by the Phoenicians around 1200, marking the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. The term Phoenicians refers to the people and culture that developed from 1200 until the conquest of Tyre by Alexander the Great in 333-332. During the first millennium, the Phoenicians identified themselves by their city names, such as Tyrians, Sidonians, or Aradians, rather than using a collective name like the Greeks. The Greeks, in contrast, recognized a collective identity, as seen in the unified force of the Achaeans during the Trojan War. The Phoenicians continued to use city names in inscriptions even in the late 3rd century. The geographical boundaries of Phoenicia were described by Herodotus and Strabon as extending from the Gulf of Iskenderun to the Nile Delta along the Levantine coast. The Phoenician cities, mainly coastal and sometimes on islands, were characterized by natural harbors. The region's narrow strip of land, bounded by the Mediterranean and the Lebanese mountains, limited the development of large political entities and encouraged maritime trade and exploration. The geography, with its fertile land and fragmented rivers, shaped Phoenician history. The mountains provided timber and water, while the coastal cities were strategically located for maritime activities, fostering Phoenician expansion across the Mediterranean Sea. Cyprus' geographical position was crucial in shaping its interactions with Phoenicia, with both regions sharing a common political and historical trajectory in the first millennium BC. Cyprus was the first point Phoenicians encountered when living in the Syro-Palestinian coast. These relations, not only in the first millennium, but also during the earlier Canaanite period, are evidenced by epigraphic records. Cyprus, known as Alashiya, appears in tablets documenting commercial and diplomatic relations with Anatolia, Ugarit, and Egypt, indicating familiarity with cuneiform script. Cyprus also has its own writing system, the Cypromenian script, during the Late Bronze Age. The earliest records found in Engomi shows the city's key role as political center controlling copper mining and export. Archaeological evidence from Engomi further confirms strong ties with Ugarit, supported by 4 Cypromenian tablets found in Ugarit's archives. Cyprus, recognized for its copper, was a key Mediterranean trade hub from the Late Bronze Age to the 6th century, evidenced by its pottery found across Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, and beyond. During the 2nd to 1st millennium transition, Cypriots redefined maritime roads, emerging as crucial traders alongside the Phoenicians, with connections extending to Huelva. The wealth of the island during the Bronze Age is connected with the myth of legendary Chineras, linked to Aphrodite's cult at Paphos. Chineras fits into the period of relations before the Trojan War, symbolizing the ties between Cyprus and both the Achaeans and the Syro-Palestinian region. He adeptly navigated diplomatic relations with his neighbors, both to the east and west of Cyprus, showcasing the island's strategic position in maintaining strong connections across the Mediterranean and the Near East. Ancient Greek and Latin historiography use the myths of the Phoenician princess Elissa and to highlight Cyprus' strategic role in the Eastern Mediterranean during the 1st millennium after the Trojan War. Elissa, symbolizing Phoenician expansion, passed through Cyprus before founding Carthage, reflecting ties between Cypriots and Phoenicians. Similarly, Tesser, exiled from Greece, traveled through Egypt and Sidon before founding Salamis in Cyprus. These narratives connect Cyprus to post-Trojan War migration and cultural exchange, emphasizing its importance as a crossroad of civilization. During the 1st millennium, the Phoenicians and the Cypriots had to deal with the rise of 2 empires, the Assyrian and then the Persian Empire, which determined the course and nature of their relations. Epigraphic evidence is crucial for identifying and interpreting Phoenician presence in Cyprus. With over 135 published inscriptions, 7 dating to the 8th century or earlier, excavations of ancient Idalio led by Maria Hadjikosti uncovered a fortified complex identified as the Palace of the Kingdom of Idalion and later as a Phoenician administrative center. This site yielded over 730 inscriptions, the largest Phoenician archive to date, mostly in Phoenician, with some of the Cypro-syllabic script, providing valuable insights into Phoenician influence during the classical and early Hellenistic periods. A preliminary conclusion. Here you can see 4 maps of Cyprus. In each map, starting from this one, and then we are going this term, you can see the Phoenician presence on the island with the sign of Aleph. The sign of Aleph is identified with the Phoenician inscriptions found on the island. And you can compare the maps and have the conclusions for the evolution of this presence through the archaic and classical period. That means through the Assyrian and Persian period. A preliminary conclusion from the comparative analysis of the data in the maps on the maps is that during the Archaic period, and particularly the Assyrian period, Cyprus exhibited a Phoenician presence across almost the entire island. This is the second, the third map. This is supported by findings identified as either Phoenician or influenced by Phoenicians aesthetics, which will be discussed further, as well as epigraphic evidence. This situation shifts in the subsequent Persian period, which is the last map, where Phoenician presence becomes more localized, primarily centered in Gideon and its politically affiliated areas. Gideon emerged as the consistent stronghold of Phoenician presence throughout the Archaic and Classical period. But let us start from the beginning. The earliest Phoenician inscription dates paleographically to the 11th century and is inscribed on an amphoriscos made of green steatite, first traced at Nicosia by Luigi Palma di Cesnola. The inscribed amphoriscos that dates to the 12th century, that means the late Bronze Age, the origin of which is undocumented, unfortunately, is currently stored at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The inscription located at the base of the vase consists of 3 letters incised between 2 parallel lines. 2 characters are the same, forming the Phoenician letter Het. The 3rd character is He, but the sequence has yet to make sense to anybody. The second inscription, that I believe is the most important inscription that we have before the 8th century. The second inscription, engraved on a grave stela from the 9th century, is notable for both its date and content. Carved on yellowish limestone similar to that used at Gideon Katharim, the inscription includes curses against tomb desecration, suggesting it belonged to a high-status individual of likely Phoenician origin. While it doesn't mention a political title, its content implies the individual held political power. Similar curses are found in the Phoenician inscription of Ahiram, king of Byblos, and in Pharaoh's, of course, hieroglyphic funerary inscriptions. If connected to Gideon, this stela serves as a key piece of evidence for the permanent Phoenician presence in the city. Salamis, Gideon, Paphos, and Hierokitia are 4 locations on the island where inscriptions were found dating before the 8th century. The inscriptions are composed of 2 or 3 letters written on pottery sherds, except the one in Paphos, which consists of 23 Phoenician letters on a pottery fragment and could be interpreted as an indigenous person's attempt to learn the Phoenician alphabet. The second most significant inscription of this early period comes from Gideon. This is a Phoenician inscription on a red slipped bowl imported from the Phoenician coast and found on the earliest floor of the monumental Iron Age sanctuary at Gideon Katharim. Initially, due to this inscription, the sanctuary was identified as the Temple of Astarte. The inscription is synchronized with the period of urban expansion of the city of Gideon. This urban development, including the creation and improvement of public spaces like sanctuaries and roads, reflects the existence of a state authority, although this authority is not epigraphically documented at this time. The association of the temple with a female deity is evident from the numerous female figurines found at the site and from a later dedicatory inscription clearly indicating that it was connected, that the temple is consecrated to the great goddess of the Phoenicians, Astarte. The temple's existence symbolized the presence of the site by the Phoenicians. I would like to mention here that the Temple of Astarte, as I already said, was considered as a symbol of the Phoenician colonization of the city of Gideon from a number of scholars. But I would like to mention that it is essential to know that the use of the terms colony and colonization creates multiple problems in the objective assessment of ancient data. Interpreting the term colony based on the models and stereotypes of modern political histories colonialism is entirely erroneous. Given the vastly different political and economic frameworks, the absence of a decline or destruction in Gideon following the end of the Late Bronze Age, coupled with evidence of continuity and prosperity, challenges the notion that the area was abruptly colonized by the Phoenicians for political and economic exploitation. However, we could argue that during the 8th century, even before, when both the inscribed bowl from Gideon and the second phase of the Temple of Astarte are dated, relations between groups change, though this does not imply relations of subjugation. As for the content of the inscription, if we accept that the bowl indeed bears an inscription of votive character to the goddess Astarte, and that the dedicator came from Damascus, we can immediately perceive the connection between Damascus, a region of strategic importance in Phoenician Cypriot relation, due to its copper deposits. The presence of Phoenicians in Damascus, located in the island's interior, should not surprise us, given that the area was already familiar to them throughout the second millennium. The rise of the Assyrian domination became a defining reality. The Assyrians' territorial conquest of Syro-Palestine and the region's economic subjugation represented challenges that each Phoenician city had to manage autonomously. Gideon, in particular, became the connecting link between Phoenician and Cyprus, consequently between Assyrian hegemony and Cyprus. An inscribed stela found at Gideon is the first and primary source for the political situation in Cyprus during the 8th century. According to the text, the island was divided into 7 kingdoms, each governed by a Sharu, king. The Cypriot ruler's subordination to Assyria did not result from military conquest, as no references suggest military campaigns or an Assyrian victory, unlike the other regions. In Cyprus' case, Assyrian domination seems to have been manifested through the payment of tribute. This Assyrian stela is dated shortly after the inscribed bowl found in the Temple of Astarte in Gideon. If the temple signifies a permanent Phoenician presence on the island, it is the only evidence available, as no epigraphic material exists at Gideon from this period, and funerary evidence is sparse. However, the erection of Sargon's stela at Gideon was no coincidence, as Phoenicians, either already established in the area or newly arrived, likely acted as Assyrians' vassals. After all, the Assyrians, being a land-based empire, lacked a naval infrastructure. This reality is tied to the increasing visibility of the Phoenician presence on the island from the late 8th century onwards, especially during the 7th century. At Gideon, inscriptions increased in number, though none had a political nature. On the contrary, Gideon, which likely corresponds to Karti-Hadasht in Assyrian sources, referring to the economic subjugation of Cypriot kingdoms to the Assyrian rulers, had its own king. During this cultural interplay, Assyrian inscriptions list 10 autonomous Cypriot kingdoms during the 7th century, while Phoenician influence, marked by Assyrian and Egyptian elements, grew. Evidence of Phoenician presence spans Damascus, Idalion, and other cities, showcasing the integration into Cypriot society. During this period, something remarkable, paradoxical occurred that became closely associated with the Phoenician presence. While the Phoenicians did not produce artifacts with Assyrian influences in their own region, remaining faithful to an Egyptian repertoire, In Cyprus, they became the carriers of Assyrian and Egyptian influences. Phoenician aesthetics and craftsmanship came to define the art of archaic Cyprus. The collectives of Phoenician art, characterized by the incorporation of elements from neighboring cultures such as Egypt, Syria, and Assyria, resulted in a variety of Phoenician styles, making it challenging to differentiate between the various centers of production in the Near East. The best example of this blending of cultural elements is provided by the famous Phoenician metal bows, whose style is first confirmed by the Homeric epics, which describe the Phoenicians as highly skilled and expert metal workers. In both style and iconography, the bows exhibit a unique combination of Egyptian, Assyrian, North Syrian, and Aegean features that no native Egyptian, Assyrian, or Syrian craftsman could mix these elements together as they appear on the bows, nor would they have placed them out of context as it is often observed in these artifacts. These elements were adopted and interpreted by Phoenician, Cypro-Phoenician, and Cypriot craftsmen living on the island, producing works of remarkable artistic synthesis. In the so-called royal tombs, funerary offerings, including imported carved ivory plaques, which adorned wooden furniture, and metal objects featuring Egyptianizing or Near Eastern motifs. The iconography of these objects includes sphinx, griffins flanking sacred trees, pharaohs striking down enemies, and men combating lions or griffins. By the late 7th century, these Egyptian motifs also began to appear in Cypriot sculpture made from locally sourced limestone. A particularly noteworthy example originates from the site of Pila Palekastron. This is an inscribed cyprus or stone maker consisting of a pyramidal limestone stele dating back to the 7th century. The inscription of this stele, written in 3 lines of Phoenician script, reveals that it was created by a sculptor whose name incorporates the elements of Halash and the name of god Eshmun. The stele was dedicated to the god Reshef Shet. The antiquity of this inscription is significant, as Margerition suggests. Its paleography indicates a date as early as the 8th century. Associated with the Phoenicians' dedication to the god Reshef Shet are the frowning head of the god Bes and the leonine head. Bes, a well-known grotesque or fearsome Egyptian deity, had multiple names and factions. His head, sometimes reminiscent of grimacing Babylonian demons, is adorned with a crown that may feature horns as seen in the ivory heads from the tomb of Salamis. Bes also decorates the famous silver bowl from Idalion, which depicts figures clad in lion skins, carrying or battling lions in the style of Oriental heroes, prefiguring the iconography of the Greek Hercules. The 4 depictions of Bes on the sarcophagus of Amathus further highlight the god's role with the funerary domain. Within this context, in which Assyrian inscriptions identify 10 autonomous Cypriot kingdoms and their respective rulers, the elements of Phoenician presence characterized by Assyrian and Egyptian influences became increasingly evident. For example, the funerary architecture of Damascus exhibits distinctive Phoenician features. In Idalion, an inscription dedicated to the goddess Anat, a name otherwise absent from first millennium records and attested only the 2nd millennium, has been discovered alongside an inscribed vase bearing a Phoenician anthroponym. Phoenician inscriptions on tombstones and sarcophagi have also been found in Hitri, Agieirini, Kourion, and Volgi, providing further evidence of Phoenician presence on the island. The Phoenicians of Kition during this period should be regarded as members of another Cypriot city-state, subordinated to the Assyrians. Gradually, Phoenicians dispersed across the island, disseminating their art and technical expertise. The fall of the Assyrian Empire gave way to the Persian Empire. The scarcity of written sources and the subjectivity of the existing ones make it difficult to assess the history of the island in the 5th and 4th century. Herodotus informs us on the integration of Cyprus in the 5th prefecture of the Persian Empire. The new superpower, in contrast to the Assyrians, not only aimed at the economic exploitation of the island, but also towards its expansionist aspirations. However, the political regime of the Persians resembles that of the Assyrians, since according to Xenophon, satrapy was not imposed on Cyprus and Cypriot kings functioned autonomously. It should be noted that the records of the Achaemenids mention Cyprus very rarely, while Greek lyric and epic poetry and historiography of the classical period add Cyprus to their repertoire increasingly, mainly because of political developments whose underlying theme was the expansionist policy of the Persians to the west and of the Athenians to the east. Undoubtedly, Cyprus was the most important naval base for the Persians, who took advantage of the naval supremacy of the Cypriots and of the Phoenicians in their campaigns in Egypt, Lade, Salamis, Evrymedon, and finally at Cnidos. During the Persian occupation, the kingdoms of Salamis, Tholi, and Gurion would unsuccessfully revolt against the Persians. The Cypriot kings plotted in a scheme of revolt with the Ionians against the Persians and the Phoenicians. This episode will mark the beginning of two significant events. Cyprus, and particularly the kingdom of Salamis, will be mentioned much more frequently in Greek literature. Within this context, Greek writers will weave the founding myths of the kingdoms that participated in the dual revolt of the Ionians and Cypriots against the Persians. The image portrayed by the Greek lyric and tragic poetry regarding the relations between Salamis primarily and consequently between a large part of the island and the Greek world was the groundwork for building a new political reality in the period that followed the revolution. The island became a field of contention between Greek and Phoenician interests. It is not a coincidence that immediately after the Ionian Revolution, the attack of the Medes and the Kytians took place against Idalion, as witnessed by the Idalion tablet, the subjugation of which opened the way to Damascus and the Copper areas. The change in the political situation is manifested by the minting of coinage of the kings of Cyprus. The kings of Idalion stopped issuing currency once they were overrun and deprived of their autonomy by the kings of Kytion. The Phoenician royal dynasty inaugurated a new political era in Kytion during the classical period. However, it does not appear to have significantly altered the material culture of the city. This period coincides with the dominance of Athens, which exerted an apparent influence not only through its political ideas, but also through its art, the allure of which resonated across the Eastern Mediterranean. A characteristic example of this influence is evident in the marble sculptures from the temple of Eshmun in Sidon, include the anthropoid sarcophagi produced using Parian marble, crafted in alignment with the classical art aesthetics of this time. Another hallmark of the classical period is the prevalence of bilingual and B-script inscriptions, which provide valuable insights into the extent of mutual influence and adoption of cultural elements, particularly in the realm of religion. These inscriptions are bilingual and B-script because the dedicator sought to ensure that their message should be understood by all members of the community, regardless of their cultural background, while simultaneously signaling the recognition of the equivalence between one deity and another. this phenomenon of religious syncretism offers a profound lens through which to comprehend the nature of relationships, the form of Phoenician presence, and the enduring coexistence and symbiosis between different cultures. Allow me to conclude this lecture in a manner that may be considered cliché, but resonates deeply with me. The migration of Zeno from Gideon to Athens and his smooth integration into Athenian society illustrates the ease with which cosmopolitan Cypriots of Phoenician origin adapted and thrived in diverse contexts. Their success emphasizes the exceptional intellectual and cultural wealth they carried with them on their journeys. Thank you very much.